We have Towson students. We have student teachers who are going to be entering our amazing profession very soon. Awesome. We have practicing teachers from local school districts. We have a great group from the Baltimore County Schools. We have a great group from the Baltimore City Schools. We also have some fantastic Towson University faculty members who are part of our Universal Design for Learning Professional Development Network. And you have to cheer for yourselves too. And this is particularly exciting because we also have special education alumni here who have come back to network and talk and hear our great speakers. So we have lots of different groups all under the umbrella of wanting to learn more about universal design for learning and the role of affect and emotion in the students that we teach, whether they are preschool students or whether they are adult learners. We are going to walk away tonight with some great concrete ideas from our speaker, Dr. Sammy Daley. If any of you had the chance to come to the January conference, you heard from David Rose. He talked a bit about universal design for learning. And Sammy is actually one of David's colleagues at CAST in Boston. And she is quite an accomplished individual herself. She is a research scientist. And her current role right now is doing a lot of projects, many projects, on emotion and learning and how to design instruction that takes that information and applies it. And she's going to tell you more about that. Before she came to CAST, Dr. Daley was a clinical fellow in the Learning Disabilities program at Children's Hospital in Boston and an instructor in the Language and Literacy program at the Harvard Grad School of Education. And she's also been a learning disability specialist in high school and college settings. She has a doctorate in human development and psychology from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and she has published in a number of places, but also the Mind, Brain, and Education Journal, where she was co-editor, and also the Journal of Post-Secondary Education and Disability. So you can see she's got a background that can connect with pretty much every single person in this room, and I have had the pleasure of hearing her speak, and I would have bought a ticket to hear her. So I am really excited to welcome Sammy to Towson University.
Thank you, Liz, for the very kind introduction. I am so happy to be here, and I am so impressed with how many folks were willing to come out at the end of a long school year on a beautiful night. So thank you very much. So as a little logistical detail before we get started, there should be a pile of these sort of boring-looking handouts on your table. It says Variability and Emotion and Learning on the top. You're going to want one of those and something to write with so that when we do the interactive portions, you're able to sort of follow along. Okay. All right, all set? Oh. If you have to share, it's not the end of the world. Okay. So I want to start with an assumption for our conversation tonight. And to sort of illustrate this assumption, I'm going to start with sharing a student's view on how emotion plays a role in his learning. So this is a drawing made by an 8th grader, we'll call him Scott, with whom I was working individually, helping primarily with reading comprehension skills. We're working on, reading comprehension strategies and different supports like that. And at the end of one of our sessions, Scott asked if we could do some spelling words. He was very good at spelling, so this was sort of a fun way to wrap up. And I gave the word epitome. And you can see the word, I guess I can't point, but you can see the word epitome down in the bottom left. He actually spelled it correctly, and then he went back and changed it, and it didn't end up quite right. But regardless, he said, I know what that word means, and I want to show you. Okay, great. So he said, can I draw you a picture? So Scott proceeded to draw this picture where the star at the top is what he called the epitome of a good student. Okay? Then you can see there's a row below that, a layer below that, where the average students are. And there's a little person leaning over saying, ha ha, to somebody who's down below who's saying, help me. And where does Scott see himself? hanging off the ledge at the bottom with vultures circling. Okay? And this is the pyramid of rank educational-wise. Okay? So what I want to use this to sort of start out as a fundamental assumption is the fact that learning and school are at once emotional and cognitive all the time. So learning is emotional work, whether for students or for teachers. When you think about your own day and your own role, clearly it's emotional, right? It's not just a sort of strictly academic skill-based experience. And as Scott so eloquently shows, for him, going through school every day is intensely emotional, right? And this, of course, it's an extreme demonstration, but the fact that he could so readily articulate in an image his emotional experience when academically he, maybe could not articulate so well his knowledge, shows just how profound this is. So there's been a lot of attention lately, wonderfully, to the role of emotion and motivation and engagement in learning. This is a fabulous sort of movement. But often we hear the label non-cognitive to describe those aspects of learning that are somehow separated from the real academic skills that we're supposed to be primarily focused on. And I just want to start with the idea that non-cognitive is a misnomer, right? There is no learning that can be ever separated into cognitive and non-cognitive. Everything is both emotional and cognitive all the time. We've made up those terms to sort of help us think about learning in various ways, but they're abstractions that don't really exist. We are both thinking rationally and experiencing something emotionally all the time, okay? So, to just give you a second to sort of think of how this plays out, we're going to do a first little interactive piece. This will be brief. I want you to take a minute, and where it says Activity 1 at the top of your sheet, there's a whole bunch of lines. Just independently answer this very simple question. What does it take to be successful in school? Make a list of as many different things you can think of that it takes for a student to succeed in school. You can think about whatever grade level you want, whatever sort of makes the most sense to you, but what kinds of things does it take for somebody to be successful? I'm going to give you a few minutes to write down your answer. Prize to whoever has the most. No, not really. With your table mates, I want you to take a second and circle anything on your list that you would categorize as purely academic, an academic skill. Circle anything that you think is even primarily about some kind of academic skill or strategy. Okay. And then go ahead and share out with your table mates. And what I'm particularly interested in is when I do this, if we weren't so big, I would have us share out all together. And what do people say? Things like self-regulation, the ability to read social situations, these kinds of things, and relatively few of the more academic things like can read fluently, this kind of thing, which clearly are important. So take a minute to talk with each other and just reflect on the fact, where did you end up? What kind of balance do you have? But I really just want to sort of say, I hope that we've sort of now started with the assumption or the sort of establishment that school is emotional work for students and teachers, that it's both experienced as emotional and the emotional aspects are critical to the learning and the success and the outcomes that we're hoping for. Fair enough? Okay. So with that as our starting point, we're going to go through two other sort of main points. Both will be substantially longer than that. That was an easy one. Okay, so variability rules. So we're going to start by talking about the variability in emotional responses to learning experiences. I'm sure that that's a familiar concept given all of your work with Universal Design for Learning. I'm sure you've heard about variability over and over again. And then we're going to focus on 3 different roles of educators that kind of come out of this thinking about emotion and affect and engagement, and particularly variability. Okay, so we'll start with thinking about variability in terms of the other 2 networks under UDL, right? The recognition and the strategic networks, which often when we talk about UDL, these seem to be the 2 that it's, not that challenging to see that there's variability in terms of these networks. So this is sort of the single slide that I'll use to demonstrate this, because I think it captures things in a somewhat intriguing way. So just to explain what you see here, this is a study done by Chantal Pratt at the University of Washington. And what she did is quite simple. She asked all of the undergraduate students in her Intro to Psychology courses to take the Nelson-Denny reading test, okay? And that has both a reading comprehension aspect and a vocabulary aspect. And I should say that she filtered out anyone who was registered with the university's Disability Services Center. So, presumably this is primarily folks who do not have any diagnosed disability. What you can see in these 403 students is if you look along the x-axis, which is the reading comprehension percentile, we have students all the way from the 1st percentile up to the 100th percentile, and it's actually a fairly wide distribution. So remember, these are students who are at a 4-year institution, most of whom, or very few of whom, have any kind of diagnosed disability, and they're reading all the way along the spectrum. And similarly, their vocabulary, which goes along the y-axis, is also widely distributed. So those of you who are teaching in post-secondary settings, I think this might be of particular interest to sort of pause and think of the wide variation in reading skills amongst your students, or those of you who are current college students. But obviously, what this is meant to show is that there is wide variability in these students' ability, what they know and can do when it comes to reading and vocabulary. Okay? So we'll just kind of take that as a given. Striking, though, right? I think so. Okay. So it turns out there's also variability in emotion-related constructs as well. And to start to kind of get into that, I just want to sort of highlight that it's become somewhat trendy for nations to conduct studies of things like happiness. So you can have a national happiness indicator, a national well-being indicator, and with the idea being that this is an outcome that should be measured, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon, right? That maybe we should be paying attention to more than GDP and that kind of thing and thinking about well-being. I'm not sure all the measures are exactly what we might choose or what I might sort of think as the most meaningful, but it's a start. And we see at this very gross level that there's wide variation here too. So this is European countries. The personal well-being indicator is along the bottom. You can see that there's some distribution. I could have picked from a range of indicators for the y-axis. I thought you all might be interested in the relationship between personal well-being and education spending. And look, it turns out that Denmark leads in both, right? The relationship is pretty clear here. Those countries that spend more on education tend to also have citizens who rate themselves as having higher levels of personal well-being. Okay, interesting. So there's some indication that there's some variability in how people are experiencing life from an emotional, affective perspective. But of course, this is not the level of analysis that's at all useful for instruction and learning, right? What we really need to get at is, how does variability work when we think about an individual student or a class of students sitting down to engage in, or maybe not sitting down, to engage in a learning experience, right? Okay, so to dive into that aspect of variability, or that level, I'm going to ask for a little bit of participation here. So I'm going to show you a series of images, and with each one, I'm going to describe a scenario. I want you to pretend that you are in the scenario being described, and go ahead and, when asked, yell out an answer to the question, how do you feel? Okay? Ready to play along? Okay. Okay. So you're standing, your best friend for your birthday got you a skydiving outing. You're standing at the edge of the plane with the instructor strapped to your back. You're about to jump out. How do you feel? Okay. This one's hard to see, I apologize. This is a statistics homework assignment. It's got a distribution of scores, and you're being asked to predict what the expected MCAS score is for state test score is for students at this school. You have to use some knowledge of statistics and probability and things and do some calculations. You're asked to do this by your principal, supervisor, whomever. How do you feel? Okay, some stress, some no problem. Okay. All right, your neighbor has just come home from the hospital, has a newborn baby, calls you up and says they need to go to the doctor. Can you come over and hang out with the baby for a couple of hours? How do you feel? All right, you're asked to do much like what I'm doing right now. You're asked to stand up and give a presentation. Maybe it's some kind of capstone thing. Maybe it's something to get a job. You're going to stand up and you're going to present and share with a whole crowd of folks. How do you feel? Nice. Okay, last one. It's a Sunday in the winter, kind of cold and rainy out. You don't have anything particular going on. You're going to spend the afternoon sitting and reading. How do you feel? Okay. So hopefully what you could hear, and I don't know if you could because it's a lot of people, so it may have gotten muffled, but when, for instance, this one, there's a whole lot of yay and a whole lot of oh my gosh, right? I'm not doing that. Similarly, woohoo, you know, oh, that would be so cute, and oh my goodness, I'm not doing that, right? Right, all through these, you can see that there's a whole lot of variability in people's emotional responses to exactly the same activity, okay? So one of the challenges when we think about engagement and school or learning is that folks, we all tend to fall into this trap of thinking, for instance, oh, this is a hands-on activity where they're getting up and doing something. That's going to be a fun day. Oh, this is a day where we're sort of sitting around, you know, maybe doing very quiet activities. That's going to be a really kind of boring day, right? And we have these sort of preconceived notions that what's going to be fun or, you know, positive emotionally for most people and what's going to be not so positive, right? But as we see, it's not the task or the activity itself that contains that positive or negative. Yes, it's true that some are going to be, you know, more frequently trigger a positive reaction, but it's not inherent to the task. We all bring with us things that shape how we perceive that activity. So this is my son Ethan when he was an infant, right? Yeah, it's awe now, but at that time, how did I feel? Ah, right? I didn't know what I was doing. He's my first, right? But then when his sister came along, because by then, what did I have? Experience, a whole lot of background knowledge, right? And similarly, you can imagine that if I told you the same scenario and said, but your grandmother is going to be next door and she's raised 10 kids, there's a lot of ways to change the dynamics of exactly the same task, okay? So that's what we're kind of going to try and leverage in thinking about how to design instruction. How can we take this same activity and build in enough flexibility and enough resources so that it is more likely to be experienced or perceived as positive by a whole variety of learners who all come with their own levels of background knowledge, their own previous experience with a similar task or lack thereof, etc. Because when we think about a whole group of learners, we've got wide variability between learners, right? And then we've also got this individual learner who, going through a given day or week or month or school year or academic career, just think of how many different activities that learner experiences, right? Everything from, riding the bus to learning, to read, to doing math things, to doing a science lab where it's a totally different set of skills, to sitting at lunch, to all of these different things, right, are going to shape perceptions of exactly of a task that we may design thinking it's going to be one way or another way emotionally. Okay? Okay, so school is emotional work, variability rules across all three networks. There's not any more variability in recognition and strategic than there is in affect. So, what are we going to do about it, right? So part of the rationale for the Universal Design for Learning framework is to try to understand where there is systematic variability so that we can design instruction that addresses it in a meaningful way, right? If everything is just infinitely variable, it's very hard to know how to shape instruction to recognize and take advantage of that. Okay, so I've broken this down into three sort of general roles of educators. Of course, like with any model, including the model of UDL that also is 3 parts, this is necessarily going to simplify a whole lot and leave out some really important things, but I'm hoping that it'll be a sort of helpful framework and it will let me touch on some key aspects of emotions and learning in instructional design. Okay, so the first role is recognizing a learner's affective state and helping the learner to recognize it. Okay, so if we think about teaching as emotional work, and you think about strong teachers, it's obvious that this is a lot of what's going on, right? Is that you're working with individual students or a class of students and have the ability to sort of read where they are affectively and in terms of skills and strategies as well. But a lot of it is figuring out, okay, here's how I'm going to adjust or peg this particular activity on this particular day for this particular student. And with a UDL approach, there would be the flexibility built in to allow that to happen, right? So we see skilled teachers do this all the time. Wouldn't it be wonderful if some of that reading and recognizing and adjusting based on affective state could be transferred into the hands of the student so that it becomes something they're able to do and able to use moving forward. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but before we get into that, we actually have a whole grant from the National Science Foundation to CAST focused essentially on the question of what does engagement look like? right? So if what we're going to do is one of our roles is to recognize a learner's affective state, it seems like it would be helpful to be able to understand, what are we looking for? What is it that we feel like, oh, there's engagement, right? And yes, we all have this sort of intuitive sense, but what we're trying to do is come up with a useful model that will allow more nuance in instructional design. Okay, so we have this grant. It's focused on what does engagement look like, and I've got to say it's probably the most challenging grant we currently have, okay? It's very, very hard. So let me tell you a little bit about how it's working. So we have this partnership with the Museum of Science in Boston, who are absolutely wonderful. They came to us because they have this problem, which I think to you, especially perhaps if you teach secondary science, will sound like a wonderful problem, that they have students who come to the museum so highly engaged and aroused and excited that they learn nothing, basically, right? They come and they are so excited that they call it the ping pong effect. They bounce from here to there, to there, to there, to there. And do they leave feeling wonderful about it? Yes, right? But the museum staff, of course, wants to go a little beyond that and wants to figure out how to harness all of that positive emotion to actually translate into deep learning. So it's, for us, a really fun project, because often when we think about engagement, we're thinking about the other end of the spectrum, right? So particularly, unfortunately, in science classes, this can be a challenge. So, so it's this great experience of looking at one end, at a margin, to try to understand more deeply what's going on and how we could design better to harness positive emotion. Okay, so I want to give you sort of the setup for how this works, because then I'm going to have you act as research assistants for a minute. Okay, so we have students in middle school come to the museum one at a time. They sign up for a time, they come. Half of them are assigned to participate individually, half are assigned to participate with a parent, because one of our questions is the role of a parent and social interaction in engagement. We're not going to get too into that right now. So we have a participant come. We have one exhibit at the museum completely closed off to the public. It's an exhibit that focuses on, it's called Math Moves, and it focuses on ratio and proportion. And it's a mix of sort of hands-on things where you're manipulating things, and then there's some sort of stations where it's more like a monitor and you're maybe moving levers and things, but it's mostly a digital display. So there's a nice sort of mix. There's six different stations in the exhibit. So we do various measures at the beginning, but the bulk of the study is that this single kid gets the chance to explore this exhibit on his own for 20 minutes. They can go to whatever they want. They can go to all 6 stations, they can go to only 1 station, they can go to things and then go back, they can end after 5 minutes if they want, whatever they want, but they have the chance to explore. There's various other sort of manipulations that happen, but mostly they're just kind of able to do whatever they want. While they're exploring, we are collecting all these different sources of data about their engagement. We have these nifty wrist sensors that measure electrodermal activity, skin conductance, okay? That shows it's a physiological measure of arousal. You'll see, I'm going to show you a video, you'll see they have on these totally spy, gadgety eye tracking glasses that monitor where their pupils are looking so that we can see what they're attending to and not, okay? So we can tell, did they read the instructions on the sign or not? All these different things. We are videotaping so that we can judge things like posture and facial expression and all of that kind of thing. All of this, remember, is to try and get a vision of what does engagement look like, okay? We have them do reports after each of their activities. I'll show you some of that. And then at the end, they reflect about the whole experience. Okay, so all of this is giving us all these sources to try and say, what does engagement look like? And it's, I should say, mostly trying to move beyond how the museum field currently measures engagement, which is with a stopwatch, right? If you stay longer, you must be more engaged. Perhaps not as robust a measure of engagement as we would like, right? So we're working on it. Okay, so we have all these sources of data, but as we talk with people in the museum field, the informal learning field, and advisors that are more from formal education even, keep arriving at the assumption, or keep having people say to us that all of these sources of data should be compared to individual experts rating what we see and rating the degree of engagement, right? So there's this widespread assumption that engagement is, pardon the comparison, but sort of like pornography, right? You'll know it when you see it, right? And there's this assumption that educators could watch kids engaged in a learning activity and have a pretty good sense of, yeah, that's engaged, that's not, okay? So, all right, we're willing to try that out, because if that's the case, forget all these other measures, we'll do that, right? So, we're going to try it. Okay, so get your paper ready. You will see that in the middle, you have 4 boxes, okay, for time 1 through 4. Here's what we're going to do. I am going to play a video of a girl who's participating in our study. She's going into 5th grade. You're going to watch her just at a single activity, so just like a couple minutes out of the 20 minutes that she had. And you'll notice that she's in the condition with her parents, so her dad will come over. And this activity, just so you have a little bit of the context, involves manipulating blocks. And the goal is supposed to be, there's like a model figure, and you're supposed to double the dimensions all 3 ways, right? You're supposed to double the length, the width, and the height of this example. And there's, just so you, again, so you have a little bit of the context, there's a screen that you'll see that has a little video that just plays on a loop that sort of demonstrates this a little. It doesn't tell how to do it, but it tells what that you're supposed to try and double the dimensions. Okay, so here's your task. I'm going to play this video in a second, and I am going to pause it after every 30 seconds. This is how we've actually done the coding. So I'm going to pause it after every 30 seconds. At that point, please put a 1 or 2 or a 3 in the box for that time segment. Don't look at your neighbors. Just do it yourself. A 1, a 2, or a 3. 1 is a low engagement, 2 is engaged, 3 is high engagement. Okay? Everybody ready? Here we go. Okay, do your first rating. No cheating, I see you talking to each other. Do it yourself. Okay, ready? Here we go. Okay, second rating. Okay, you ready? word rating. Okay, last one coming up. All right, that one's a little tough, but go ahead. Okay. So, you hold on, you got one more thing to do before you talk. Okay, so now at the end of the session, we reflect with the participant, and we asked her to pick 2 words that she would use to describe her experience of this block station. So pick your 2 words. And once you do that, then you can compare at your tables and see how similar you were in your ratings and how similar you were in your choice of words. Okay, but you're all educators. Shouldn't you be able to recognize engagement when you see it, right? So, well, let's show how we did as raters. So I'm going to show next this clip that indicates 3 of the research staff doing the same activity. There were actually 6 of us, some from the museum, some from CAST, doing it. And in the clip I'm going to show, so this is a sort of nifty software that lets you do coding of video. And you're going to see the 3 lines. Each line is a different person's code. Red is low engagement, yellow is so that's a 1, yellow is a 2, green is a 3. And I think you probably can predict what's going to happen here. I know, it's okay. Thank you, though. Okay. Got it now, right? Yep. Okay. So remember, there are 3 different raters, and ideally, they would all be the same color. Okay, so now we've got 2 green and a yellow, but look what's coming up. And we did do it in 30 seconds, but I don't have it set that way. But now you can see we're moving into a 1, a 2, and a 3 all at the same time. I saw several of those at your tables as well. So I don't have to let it continue playing, but that's the gist, right? This is only 3 of the 6. We were all over the map. And we did multiple videos trying to get more and more reliable, and no, we just basically couldn't do it. So stay tuned to see what all of the other measures, which hopefully will be somewhat more consistent, tell us about engagement. But I think it might be somewhat more promising to let the student tell us, right? Okay, so after she completed the activity, she was right after, like as she's transitioning to the next activity, she's asked to reflect. So you can see here the questions are about describing how she felt during that activity. So how interested were you, how confused were you, etc. And you might say she's sort of middle of the road, right? She's a little bit interested, also a little confused. Oh, she thinks it's a little fun, but also a little difficult. A little happy, a little frustrated, a little bored, but not at all proud and not at all nervous, right? Okay, so, all right, so she's sort of, like kind of, I don't know, she's sort of okay with it, not totally enthusiastic, right? But also not like that was awful. oh, I think I have to go out of this again. Let's listen to her explain using her 2 words.
Okay, that makes sense. The next one that you went to, hey, wake up, computer. The next one you went to
You can hear
was
that?
scaling shapes, this one. Take a moment, think about it, remember what you did, and decide which of these words describe how you felt.
Oh, hold on. Is the sound okay? People in the back, can you hear? I realize, hold on.
When did you feel frustrated?
Frustrated.
Trying to rebuild the shape with the other blocks. The block was hanging off, so I had to hold it to finish it.
You felt like that was frustrating?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other words to describe how you felt?
Excited.
Excited, yeah.
It was fun to build and see how to double it.
You thought that was really exciting?
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Okay.
So she's frustrated and excited, which actually in the 50 or so kids we've talked with so far, that happens more often than not, that it's both a somewhat, what you might qualify as a negative with a positive. Really frequently that's what happens, which I think is a wonderful demonstration to all of us that, it's not all just fun to be engaged, right? A little bit of difficulty can actually go along with a really positive emotion, which is great to learn from. So how'd you do? Did you get all the words right? Okay. So it seems that there's some promise in asking students to do some of this reflection because we perhaps are not so able to do it. Now, of course, this is a highly contrived situation, right? If you were sitting down and talking with her during the activity, you'd have a much different level of insight. But still, the assumption that we can tell engagement or not, I think there's some reason to question that and to think about, well, there's probably some benefit in helping students to do it, even if, we could accurately take on that role. Having it be a skill that they can monitor their own emotional state and then act to customize their learning environment accordingly seems like something that's worth sort of striving for. So I want to just show one example of an approach to doing this. Is anyone familiar with the mood meter? Do you know this? No? Okay, great. So you can see the 4-quadrant thing on the left. And this is a really common way to talk about emotions. So a lot of the emotion research has this kind of 4-quadrant setup. And the 2 axes are along the bottom is some indication of valence or feelings. So from unpleasant to pleasant. And then along the y-axis, it's called energy. Sometimes it's called arousal. Or activation. This is the sort of degree of strength of the feeling. So just to sort of orient to how this works, you would think that somebody in the yellow quadrant is feeling very pleasant and also very high energy. So we often will think of this as the Elmo quadrant, right? Like, woohoo, this is great. That's yellow, okay? The blue is unpleasant but low energy. So this is the sort of bored, depressed, not, a lot of arousal or activation and not very pleasant. The green is, I think, purposefully green. Is in that kind of calm, right? So it's pleasant but low energy. And then the red is, as you might imagine for red, high energy and negative. So this is angry, really frustrated, scared. There's lots of actual emotions that could fit in there, but this is something that's highly felt, strongly felt, and negative, unpleasant, okay? So what I'm going to show is a clip from this social emotional learning curriculum called the Ruler Approach. This is great curriculum out of Yale, and the mood meter is one of the tools that they use in the curriculum to help students learn how to monitor their own affective states. And I just want to show what that looks like, and it's a very brief clip. So this is at the beginning of class one day.
I'm feeling in the yellow because I'm excited for the bazaar. Because I want to go to school and learn. I'm feeling in the yellow because my cousins are coming over on the weekend. Today I'm feeling in the green quadrant because it's my day and we usually start the day out nice and calm.
At ease. So you can see that these students, and actually I don't know what grade, I apologize, but they've clearly learned how to use the mood meter as a skill to sort of stop and reflect on their own affective state. And then what you can't see is that there is an accompanying sort of curriculum that works through what happens if you're in some days you're going to be in a red or you're going to be in a blue. What do you do? And there are strategies that go along with it to sort of help you recognize that and adjust and be able to sort of engage in whatever the learning task is, even if you're in these, not ideal quadrants. And lest we think that this quadrant experience is only for kids, there are grown-up versions of the mood meter as well. And I just want to sort of mention, there's this book by Tony Schwartz. I don't know if you're familiar with Tony Schwartz. He does a lot of sort of workplace and emotion kind of things. There's a book called The Way We're Working Isn't Working. And he uses the 4 quadrants to talk about people's experience of their workplace and their career. So you may be able to imagine where in the 4 quadrants you might sometimes feel, positive or negative. And then he sort of relates that to workplace, productivity, efficiency, etc. So what I'd like to do, and there isn't a space on the paper for this, but I just want to pause and allow you to talk a little bit at your tables about how you could imagine embedding some opportunity for students to reflect on their affective state in whatever it is you're teaching, whatever sort of classroom situation you're in. And I'll just mention a few different, so there's the mood meter kind of approach. We've also worked with folks who put little questions on the bottom of quizzes or worksheets or whatever it is, or exit slips or things like that that might have things sort of like this. We've done work where we ask students to rate the difficulty of different questions or tasks, and that's quite revealing, and students love being able to say, this was really hard for me. So that's a sort of another take on affect. So just pause, brainstorm for a few minutes with your table about things that you might build in that lets students stop and reflect on where they are affectively. Everybody said you'd all be willing to talk. It's great. So does anybody have any ideas they're actually willing to share with the whole group? Anything creative that came up that you'd like to talk about? Back table. of the glitter jar. Very cool. Yeah. Okay, so there's some training and some teaching to help them recognize when to use the glitter, how to use it, etc. Fabulous. Another idea anybody wants to share? The other back table. Nice and loud.
So this is actually an idea that I had in one of my courses here, and our professor
Woo!
come in and have us pick up these cards. They were either red, yellow, or green. And so if you were feeling like, yeah, I'm good, I'm ready to go, you can take the green. If you were like, I'm kind of not really having a great day, you pick up the yellow. If you were just like, don't talk to me, I don't want to be here, you pick up the red. And so that way she kind of knew like everyone's moods and personalities throughout the day. And she's like, I can pick on this student today, they're in a good mood, or I'm not even going to mess with that student, they're just here taking notes quietly. And it was just kind of a good way for her to gauge our attitudes of the day and then kind of teach you that. So it was great. That's just it.
Love it. All right, one more. Anything else?
We actually talked about the importance of first having students understand what the emotions really mean and what kinds of things occur when you have those kinds of emotions, and then getting to know the students so you can understand their culture and maybe what they've had modeled at home. And we're here trying to change and be the saviors, and they really need a little bit more, need to know a little bit more about our expectations, and we just think all that goes together first.
Nice. Well said. Thank you. Okay. So it sounds like there were great examples. Perhaps I should collect them somehow. But okay. So role number one for educators in thinking about emotion, variability, etc., was recognizing and helping learners to recognize where they are emotionally. Sounds like hopefully you're going away with some ideas about how to do that. I am. So the second role is, okay, now we're going to design instruction and scaffolding and interventions and things that reflect this understanding. Okay, so this is sort of the obvious next step. So how can we sort of demonstrate in our design of instruction some appreciation of the affect in the learning process? So to get into this, it's perhaps a helpful starting point is how our stress and emotional systems work, right? So it's hard to think about how do we consider affect unless we know what it is that affect is doing to us, for us, with us, as we're experiencing different emotional or affective states, okay? So, a lot of my work involves some kind of physiological measure, something where we're taking some kind of signal from the body. And the reason for that is that, well, as it says, we're mammals, right? So our stress and emotional system is developed just like other mammals, okay? And that means that it behaves in a certain way. So this image is of this wonderful neuroscientist, Robert Sapolsky, out of Stanford. He was a pioneer in making the connections between the stress system of animals like the baboon, which is the specific species that he focuses on, and humans. So he did all this work initially just with baboons, looking at how their stress system responds based on their hierarchy, position in the hierarchy of the troop, or whatever it is that I think it's troop, right? And so he learned a whole lot about cortisol and the hormonal responses and the sort of cascade of physiological things that happens when you're in a stress state, when baboons are in stress states. And then learned, or realized that humans have exactly the same physiological responses in a lot of ways. What's unique about humans, and what he argues so beautifully in a wonderfully titled book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, is that humans have the unique ability to respond with a stress response to things that are only imagined, right? A baboon engages that stress response when a predator is coming towards them, right? That's what the stress response is designed to respond to. It is designed very specifically to get you out of danger, right? We are the only species that we've sort of conclusively determined, at least, who can think about, oh my goodness, I need to pay the mortgage and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that, and that engenders a stress response, okay? I sit down, I'm a student and I sit down and I'm given a high stakes test, stress response. Is that test physically dangerous to me? No, right? I can imagine things, and the exact same stress response that happens to a baboon when a lion is approaching happens to me, okay? So you can imagine the risks associated with this, right? So a lot of the research about stress focuses on people who are chronically engaging the stress system, which is over time really not very healthy at all, okay? So actually we've at CAS done work that demonstrates that kids with learning disabilities, when presented with a reading task, this is with middle school kids, their stress system responds, it's triggered. Not only that, just walking into a situation where they're going to be asked to read triggers a stress response, okay? So imagine going through, and of course that's not the only case, right, but that's the particular one we focused on, but imagine going through an entire academic career with this sort of chronic triggering of a stress response, okay? So how does that work? How does the stress response get triggered? We like to think of it in terms of a very simple balance, it's sort of deceivingly simple, where we know from lots of literature from neuroscience, from animal studies, and from studies, behavioral studies with humans, that we are all going through our days constantly asking ourselves the question of, is this good for me or is it bad for me? Okay? When you came in and decided where to sit in this room, you looked at the options and thought, is that one good for me or bad for me, or that one good for me or bad for me, right? Not consciously, but basically that's what you're doing. You're constantly evaluating risk, okay? So when you are answering this question for yourself, there's two sort of basic ends of the scale that can tip you one way or the other, okay? And we refer to them as demands and resources, okay? Demands are things like, does this endanger my safety? Does this prevent me from getting to my goals? Is this going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time? Is this threatening to my sense of well-being? All of these kinds of things are demands, right? Resources are things like, do I have external support to make it through whatever this situation is? It's my internal predispositions could be a resource. They also could be a demand, actually. But if I know that I'm sort of able to persist and handle challenges, I come in with that knowledge. Again, this is not happening at a conscious level, but I sort of have this sense of, oh, I can kind of handle this risk. Resources could also be knowing that something is really going to move you forward towards a personal goal. Okay? So there's demands, there's resources, and everything we do, we're constantly evaluating that. Okay? So when you think of a learner and a specific task, they're also evaluating these demands and resources all the time. Okay? So when we think back to the pictures that I showed, the skydiving, the babysitting, etc., basically, what you're doing in evaluating how you feel is you're thinking, is this good for me or bad for me? Do I have the resources necessary to meet the demands of this task? And if not, and the demands outweigh the resources, we call that a threat state, okay? And the threat state is what gets your stress system going in a not so healthy way, okay? So what happens when the stress system kicks in? And I realize that this is too small probably for you to see, but it's showing the sort of physiological cascade. And the gist is that along the bottom, those circles, the little icons there, are showing all the things that happen physiologically because of the cascade of hormones that are going from your brain through various steps, won't get into that, to the rest of your body. So in a nutshell, what happens is anything that's not needed to respond to that stressor shuts down. So that's things like your digestive system slows. Because if you're running from a lion, you don't really care about digesting what you had for breakfast, right? So that slows down. Your heart beats faster, and you've all felt that, right? When your stress system's going, your heart beats faster. Your lungs dilate, the bronchi in your lungs dilate because you need a lot of oxygen to be able to run from that lion, right? But things like memory, not really so important, right? You need to be able to just respond quickly. You don't need access to what happened with the lion, a month ago. You need to just be able to respond. So physiologically, because of the cascade of hormones, your body is responding in a certain way. And in terms of learning, having this negative appraisal, this sort of demands outweighing resources, this is bad for me kind of reaction, we know from a whole range of studies, and actually I realize I didn't put citations on here. If you're interested in the citations for all these, send me an email and I'm happy to send them. We know that if you have a negative stress response, it narrows your thinking and limits your flexibility. Again, because you need to be able to respond quickly. You don't want to be debating, should I climb that tree or dive in that ditch, right? You just do something. You can't think creatively, your memory is impaired, and really critically, you're not very likely to persist in effort, and you think everything is a lot harder than if you're not in that stress state. So for instance, there's these wonderful studies of perception of the steepness of a hill, and you show people in a lab sort of happy, positive movies or kind of sad, negative movies, station them at the bottom of the hill. The people who just watch those negative movies think the hill is really steep. It's amazing, right? I mean, that's like perception, straight perception, right? But because you've got this certain hormonal physiological response, it affects your thinking. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of designing instruction? So critically, the perception of demands and resources is all about just that perception. So as we talked about earlier, it's not that certain tasks inherently have, they do inherently have some demands and some resources, but layered on top of that is whatever we're bringing to the situation, okay? All right, we're gonna try this out. I'm hoping that if this is not clear, ask me and I'll try and explain it a little more. But what I have here is a page from a physics curriculum. This is a 9th grade physics curriculum from a wonderful partner of CAST called EDC. They made this really rich, robust physics curriculum. They also do biology and other curricula, all funded by the National Science Foundation. Great, very thoughtful work. It was all text-based and quite difficult for students. And they were particularly having difficulty reaching students who are at the sort of lower end of the spectrum in terms of reading ability and things. So we worked together to think about how to apply principles of universal design for learning to this curriculum. And I'll get into what we sort of ended up with in a minute. But first, what I wanted to do was to have you, and you have this on the back side of your sheet, you have this paragraph called the Law of Conservation of Energy. And here's what I'd like to spend a few minutes doing. Could you, in your groups, think through what demands do you see in learning the physics content? So, what demands are there? What resources exist in this, the print-based version? And you can use your imagination a little bit, right? Because imagine that this is being used in a classroom and it has the usual affordances of a classroom. And what resources could you imagine? What do you think you could provide to support the learning of the physics, support students to understand the law of conservation of energy? Okay? So what I'm hoping is that we can start to get a sense of where are there different elements that we can use to sort of manipulate that demands and resources balance. Clear enough? Okay. If not, let me know. So go for it. Spend a few minutes. You need to probably read the paragraphs. And then spend a few minutes talking about the demands and resources. Students to learn the physics here. You can shout out ideas. Vocabulary. Clearly, vocabulary is going to be a challenge. Others? Abstract thinking. Great. You need some prior knowledge to be able to get into this section of text for sure. Anything else? Interest level, right, / anxiety level perhaps. Yep. Attention span, vocabulary.
The format of the page.
Format of the page. In that it's quite dense. Yep. Okay, and no pictures. Yep. You have to be able to decode. You have to be able to read somewhat fluently, probably. Right, so there's clearly quite a lot of demands, right? As is the case in this curriculum. So what resources did you see that exist in here, or that you imagine exist in the context of the classroom? Any? Glossary, yeah, so clearly there's some bold-faced words, there must be a glossary, okay. Other? A model?
Pre-existing knowledge. Other laws, physics laws.
Yeah, so they refer to this being one of the laws. Probably there have been some discussion of other laws. That's true. Okay. Ideas about resources that you could imagine. I know you probably have lots. So let's take 3 ideas of resources you could imagine adding to shift the balance, the perceived balance here of demands and resources. Because we should point out that for some kids, they are going to perceive this in a very positive, well-resourced way, right? So we're not assuming that everybody is threatened, okay? Because that is definitely not the case, actually. I've seen this curriculum taught, and there are some kids who are diving in, totally love it, okay? Fabulous. So pairing students with other students who can support their learning. Scientist in residence. Okay, so not student support, but a scientist is support. Yep. Okay, one more. Videos. Perfect. Yeah. So I'm sure that there were lots and lots of ideas of ways that you could sort of try and shift that balance here. And what we're striving for when we think about demands and resources is to get the balance almost balanced, actually. Okay, so we tend to think about if demands way outweigh resources, as I said, that puts us in a threat, anxiety kind of state, not so positive. But also, if resources way outweigh the demands, which is actually what we see at the in the Museum of Science context, where it's very heavily resourced and there's almost no demands, that one maybe doesn't count as boredom, but it's a different kind in the museum context, but it's a different kind of not so ideal for learning, right? So what we're striving for is this channel where demands and resources are pretty evenly balanced. And I think you can all sort of imagine in your own experiences when you feel like, this is going to be kind of tough, but I think I can do it. That's typically, people experience that as the most engaged kind of conditions, Okay? So when we think about engagement from a UDL perspective, we're sort of aiming for this creating conditions where learners can adjust their own demands and resources to get themselves into this ideal state. Okay? So that means there's got to be a lot of options available, right? A lot of flexibility, because we don't know exactly what different learners are going to need to get themselves into this channel. Okay? So just to sort of show you what we ended up doing in collaboration with EDC, we made an online physics curriculum. The URL is there. Maybe some of you can't see it. It's udlfoundationscience.cas.org. I mention it mostly because it is freely available as an open education resource, half of a year or so of physics, 9th grade physics curriculum. We made an online UDL version, essentially, of the physics. So this is one of the pages. There's an arrow pointing to the section that you all just read. And here's what we ended up with for that particular section. I'm not going to go through everything, but just to sort of show some of the highlights, there's a text-to-speech bar along the side that'll make everything read aloud. There's a translation to Spanish. There's a dictionary. There's highlighters. That's all in that bar that you see on the left. There you can see that there are underlined words for the glossary words. Instead of bringing you to a static glossary, it brings you to a multimedia glossary that has movies and images and all of that kind of thing. You can see that the big thing on this page is a video that is actually really funny, where the teacher releases the bowling ball and stands there and is confident it's not going to hit him, right, because of the law of conservation of energy. All sorts of different supports. There's for the different questions, the open-ended questions. Students can respond either by typing, by audio recording their answer, by drawing, by making a table. And then there's hints built in. So what we're striving for here is that students can customize their experience based on this universally designed curriculum so that they balance their own demands and resources. And fortunately, that's mostly what we saw. So some kids treated it like a textbook and just read the text, just like they would if they were handed a paper version, right? Other kids used every button available, right? Watched every video, clicked on every hint, were totally into all of the supports. And it didn't fall by sort of stronger students and less strong students. Some of the very strong students chose to use everything. They thought that, oh, there might be something in that hint that's really going to be helpful for me, so I'm going to really take the time to sort of click on that and engage with it. Which, is great to see that we can't predict who's going to use what. We can't predict who feels sufficiently supported by the text alone and not. So let's let them judge for themselves. And one of my all-time favorite quotes, and this is a picture of the students at one of the schools where it was piloted, said, "This is mad work, but it's easier," right? So it is hard work. Learning this physics is hard. It's mad work, but it's easier. And he went on to talk about how you don't have to worry about all that other stuff that gets in the way of learning the physics, right? It's not about struggling with the book when you're trying to read it for homework and you're not the strongest reader and you can't make sense of it. There's all these pieces that, like for this kid, handwriting was a challenge. So when the open-ended questions were on paper, that was really hard for him, right? So this is exactly what we want, that he has scaffolded himself so that he's able to engage in a deep way with the physics, which is hard, but not be hung up by all the other somewhat irrelevant pieces. Okay, so we've gone through recognizing and helping students to recognize where they are affectively, a little bit about demands and resources and how to design instruction that allows students to sort of carve their way through. The third role that I wanted to touch on is crafting feedback that recognizes the importance of affect and works to support it. So feedback is one of the tools that is sort of most powerful in the affect, emotion, engagement, motivation toolbox, right? Because feedback has these dramatic effects. The nature of the feedback, the frequency of it, all of the sort of context in which it's given, all of these things about feedback are really important. So this will be a quick one, because I don't think it takes much time. Actually, we don't even have to share out about this one at your table. Just pause for a minute and try and picture in your head the most effective feedback you've ever received. It could be in any domain, but some feedback from someone along the way that you felt like, wow, that made a difference to me, and I remember it, and it had an impact. Do you want to share with each other? Okay, you can share. You get 3 minutes. For some of you, it might be hard, but in your groups, you had a chance to share. I'm just going to keep us moving in the interest of time. And hopefully you identified perhaps some things that were in common about what your effective feedback experience were. Maybe not. Sometimes what's interesting about feedback is that different types of feedback are most appropriate in different conditions, right? So you often see, you can recognize this very easily often with athletic coaches, right? You see the screaming on the sideline kind of situation sometimes. I don't know that that's necessarily effective, but sometimes perhaps it is, right? And then you see the sort of pat on the shoulder, whisper in the air kind of feedback. And they use that in very different ways, different situations, different players, et cetera, right? So, there are all sorts of sort of aspects of effective feedback. We won't get into all of them, but I just want to focus on a couple that are maybe particularly relevant for us tonight. And I'm sure that you've heard about mastery-oriented feedback, which is part of the UDL guidelines. We always like to add the caveat, which is sort of what I just said, which is that while we sort of endorse mastery-oriented feedback, and there's a whole lot of research showing its effectiveness, of course, we recognize variability. And it's not going to be appropriate for everybody in every situation. And that's part of why the first role of being able to identify where students are and helping them to identify is going to help to sort of shape what kind of feedback is appropriate. That said, in general, it's hard to go wrong with mastery-oriented feedback in most cases. And the gist of mastery-oriented feedback is that the sort of general comments, good job, nice paper, you did great, etc., tend to have very little effect. So I'm sure as you were sharing your stories about effective feedback, nobody said, it was most effective when I just got an A+, and that's it, right? That kind of vague, good job kind of feedback is never going to be sort of the most effective. And not only that, there's all sorts of research by Carol Dweck, amongst others, but quite a lot by Carol Dweck, showing that it can have actually detrimental effects, that when kids are praised primarily for intelligence, for instance, like, oh, you did so great, you must be so smart, which of course is meant well, that actually leads to less likelihood to take risks in learning, less likelihood to persist when there are challenges ahead, and more likely to attribute difficulties to a lack of ability or intelligence instead of a lack of effort. Whereas praise for very specific aspects of process and effort and strategy used have the opposite effect, where if you really target the feedback and the praise particularly to, I see how hard you worked to apply that strategy in this case, or something in that vein, students will be more likely, when given a choice, to take what they think is the option that lets them learn new strategies and try out new things, as opposed to sticking with the safe kind of choice where they think they're more likely to have continued success. And really, isn't that sort of what we're going for, right? That they're going to face new learning situations with an attitude of, I want to try something that might be a little bit challenging for me, that I feel like I can use the strategies that I have, or I can learn new ones, because that's how learning works, not that it's based on intelligence or some sort of overall ability. So mastery-oriented feedback responds to a specific behavior, and it focuses on a specific aspect of the learning process. Okay? So just as a kind of example, and this actually it's not an ideal example because it's not responding to a specific behavior, but this is my son Ethan. Don't tell my daughter that he's in twice and she's not, sorry. But anyway, this is when he was in kindergarten, and I know many of you are familiar with elementary schools and how big the 100-day celebration is, yeah? Okay, so this is his 100-day celebration, the 100th day of school, and if you're not in elementary schools, just know this is a big deal. So he is displaying his vest that he had to make and glue on 100 of something. He chose 100 twigs. We spend a lot of time finding twigs, gluing them on, you know. He's got a necklace with 100 pieces of macaroni. Everything's 100, and this is a big deal. He wears this, they made crowns, which along the bottom say 100 days smarter. What does that tell you? At first I was like, I don't know how I feel about that, right? But then when you stop and think about it, what does it say? You don't come to school with some level of smartness. You work and you spend time at school and you make an effort, and that's what makes you smarter. Would I use smart? Maybe not. But I still think there's a mastery-oriented message there that's saying, this is something worth celebrating. We have been working together for 100 days, and we've all gotten smarter, right? So it's this sort of wonderful celebration of effort and process and learning. Whether we see these things later on in school, not so much. But in kindergarten, affect and cognition, affect and academic skills go hand in hand all the time, right? And then they sort of pull apart often later, unfortunately. So the next sort of, or a more recent version of, or extension of mastery-oriented feedback, I just want to highlight because I find this a really powerful study. So I'm just going to we're coming to the end of time, this will be quick, but I just want to take a minute to explain this study that came out in the Journal of Experimental Psych, because I hope you'll be as inspired by it as I am. So this is a group that focuses on the racial achievement gap, okay? And how persistent it is and what kinds of strategies can we use to narrow the gap, okay? So they did this series of studies focused on what they termed the mentor's dilemma, that sometimes you really need to give some really hard feedback, right? How do you do that without totally crushing the motivation and self-confidence of the learner, okay? And they're particularly concerned about minority students in this regard because there's evidence that negative feedback is particularly damaging for those populations, okay? So this study, beautiful. They have, I'm going to forget the grade. I'm pretty sure it's 9th graders. If you want it and you want to send me an email, I'm happy to send it to you and we can double check, but I'm pretty sure 9th graders. Let's go with that. Teachers have the kids do essays, just a regular whatever assignment it was during the year, okay? Essays come in, teachers grade them like they usually would, put whatever comments they usually would, okay? Researchers do nothing to that whole process. It's just a regular paper like any other paper. All right, then the researchers come in and they randomly put the papers into 2 stacks, okay? Not by grade, the distribution or anything, totally randomly put the papers into 2 stacks, okay? On one stack of papers, they paper clip a note that says, I'm giving you these comments so you have feedback on your essay. On the other stack of papers, they paperclip a note that says, I'm giving you these comments because I have high standards and I know that you can meet them. Okay? That's it. That's the entire manipulation. The results are absolutely astonishing. When asked if they want to revise and resubmit the papers, something like, should have written it down, 87% of African American students who were given the WISE feedback chose to do so. The African American students who were given the control group feedback, something like 12% chose to do so. That is the only difference. I have no idea what these kids' grades were. I don't know what the teacher wrote in the margins, right? The only difference is that one note conveyed WISE feedback. There are 3 elements that this research group have determined for WISE feedback. It explicitly conveys that critical feedback reflects the teacher's high standards and not a bias against the student, which is how it's often perceived. Okay? So, conveys high standards, assures the student of the potential for him or her to reach those standards, and provides students with the resources they need in terms of substantive feedback to reach the higher standards being asked of them. We're assuming in this case that that was provided in the comments that the teacher gave. Okay? So I just want to sort of flag this because I find it so enormously powerful and revealing about how feedback can have such a dramatic impact. Okay, so we talked about school as emotional work, the variability in affect, 3 roles of educators. To end, I just want to mention this quote. Everyone, you've probably seen it on like Facebook. Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid, right? If we provide an environment that is so demanding without the appropriate resources, it makes a whole lot of sense that kids would have a certain view of themselves as learners. I did a little looking. It turns out it's not from Albert Einstein at all. But we'll ignore that and just say that it's actually a good idea. And when we think about a learner like Scott, we see that he's in an environment with wonderful teachers and lots of good things going for it, but he's clearly feeling like a fish who's being asked to climb a tree, and that's having a really serious emotional impact on him. Thank you.